There we go. Let's continue. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday evening to you. I hope you've been spending some time outside in the glorious rain. I got a couple of nice walks in when just the gentle rain. There was no wind, there was no lightning. It was just good soaking rain, and it's brought so many more things to life. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be going over some of these recent happenings that I think are probably related to rain. In fact, one of them is tonight. It's a little creepy. I'll show it to you in just a second. Let's get our slideshow started right now. With from the beginning. So last Thursday's column dealt with toads, and it was a modification of a column that I'd written several years ago when I was just completely enthralled by the voices of the males that were surrounding me everywhere. It seemed like everywhere I walked, even my own neighborhood, the male toads were courting. That was in early May of the year when I originally wrote that column. Well, when May came around this year, I did my toad walks. I went around my neighborhood. I went to different parks, and I'd hear one here and I'd hear one there, but I just didn't hear them in the volume that I was accustomed to hearing them at that particular time of year. And of course, it was because of our lack of rain. We had such a dry spring. There were a few determined individuals that were out there, and they were singing their little throats out, but it wasn't really I wasn't hearing them in the numbers that I was really hoping to be able to hear them. And I gotta say, toads are one of my favorites. Of course, what isn't a favorite of mine, right? I snapped this photo. This is the sidewalk out in front of Hickory Knolls. This is actually not a male toad. She wasn't heading to the water to do the singing. She was actually probably on her way to do some listening, but she had made a pit stop by our front door, which has a light on it that draws insects at night. And look at her belly. I think she's probably partially full of bugs and partially full of eggs. So I think in her priority list, she had have a good dinner first and then go see what's hanging, who's hanging out down there in the creek next to the nature center. But and that's a general rule of thumb. If you find a really large toad, chances are good that it's a female. If it's somewhat smaller toad, and the males do get some breeding colors, they darken up on their throats. They get some enlarged bumps on their thumbs. Only during the breeding season do those bumps occur, but that's another way you can tell. But generally, I just go by size. If it's really big, it's a girl. And now this is a photo. This was actually taken in early May a couple of years ago. This was over at Norris Woods. But this is the sort of activity we started to see here, not in the normal, quote unquote, time of year that we would expect to have toads calling, because the water just wasn't available. A lot of our ephemeral ponds, which is one of the options that these toads choose, they had mostly dried up by early to mid-May. And in fact, it wasn't until, oops, I got a little typo there, mid to late June is what that's supposed to say, were they actually out there and calling. They've kind of slowed down again. I haven't heard a toad in the last week or two. As we got into July, they kind of went back to the next phase of their life cycle, but they were out in numbers at the end. I would say June 23rd, June 24th, June 25th, that part of June, they were really out in force. I wanted though to have you look at this photo, and we're going to look a little bit more closely at it. You can certainly see a few toads paddling around in this pond at Norris Woods. This, by the way, if you go to Norris Woods in St. Charles, The nature preserve is to the north of the parking lot. This photo is actually taken to the south in a little area we call Norris Woods Creek, which is basically a drainage for that part of the east side of St. Charles. A lot of rainwater and snow melt goes through this area. We modified that creek a few years ago because it was washing all types of sediment into the Fox River, and to kind of slow things down, we created these little ponds that A, catch sediment, and B, attract toads. So, 1, 2, 3, you see maybe a handful, half a dozen, but if we look more closely, turns out this was a super popular spot for toads. There's one up here, there's one here, actually there's two there, so that's 3, 4, and there actually, I think there's somebody underneath there, so that would be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12. I don't know exactly what's going on in this last photo. There might be 3 or 4, which again, that's a toad thing. These guys, some toads we call, or some frogs in the area we call explosive breeders. The wood frog, which we don't really see much of in Kane County, but it does occur farther north up in Lake County. Some of our other counties have wood toads. They breed within a very short period of time. It's an explosive sort of event. Toads I think of as being indiscriminate. Any kind of little puddle of water will set them to breeding, put them in breeding mode in the springtime. And the males, they'll kind of hop on whatever they think, might have them. Sometimes it's another male toad, sometimes it's a leaf. Sometimes it's several male toads on a female, and I kind of think that's what's going on here. It's kind of unfortunate. Sometimes we will find those large females dead in these breeding ponds because they've been drowned, even though they are amphibians. They once breathe through gills. Once they become adults, they can't breathe air, and when they get mobbed like that, sometimes the females don't survive. But we're not in any danger of running out of American toads anytime soon. What's the product of all this activity? Well, we're starting to see that now. The toad came first, and those are, you can tell those from frog eggs because toads lay their eggs in strands. I've heard them referred to as ribbons. One writer called them streamers, which I thought gave a nice festive note to those egg masses. A short period of time, those dark spots, those eggs turn into these little tadpoles. And when you see masses of dark tadpoles in ponds, you're looking at toads. And in our area, we only have the American toad. In northeastern Illinois, we only have the one species of toad, the American toad. So look for these. They'll be here for a few weeks, but you're going to start seeing this. These toads, their survival strategy, because there's so many of them, they get eaten by a lot of different things. A lot of birds will come and pick them up. Other invertebrates sometimes will go after them. A dragonfly nymph, which is highly predatory, they will eat these small tadpoles. So it's the classic safety in numbers, but not all of those numbers are going to survive. As long as a few of them though do, the species is going to be just fine. Once those tadpoles go through their metamorphosis, they stop breathing through their gills and they start breathing through their lungs. They come out of the water and they live their life on land. This was actually not a recent metamorph. This was, I took this picture, I think 2 years ago. And you can see it's compared to my thumb there, that's probably 3/4 of an inch. They're even smaller than that when they first emerged. So this guy probably had been out for a couple of weeks by the time I found him. He was one of many, many toads that we found that year. So start looking for these tiny toads. There were some that are actually emerging now. They're the product of the May matings, but we're going to see another rush of them now as we get into late August and into September. These guys are going to have to eat a lot of bugs really quickly so that they can have enough bulk to their bodies to be able to get through their first winter, which will be coming up before we know it. Hard to believe, huh? So we're gonna stay in the whole herpetile realm for another couple of slides here. We're going to leave the amphibians. We're gonna hop over to reptiles. We're gonna talk about one that's a little bit rare in this area. We don't get a lot of lizard sightings. This was kind of funny though. This was last Friday. Laura, you know how this goes. I got a text message at 11:25, and I got to be honest, I didn't hear my phone. I think I might even had the volume down. The text message from Laura said, Pam, I just caught this little lizard skink in my front room. Is it native? And what should I do with this poor little thing? Well, I didn't see that text till much later. I did, however, feel my phone vibrating 4 minutes later. And it was our own Laura, who tunes in every week. And she was a little bit freaked out. I was a little bit excited. And Laura, if you want to hop in and tell us anything more about this this discovery that you made, I can tell my side of it. I was really excited because this is not the first or the second or even the third time I've heard about lizards showing up kind of out of nowhere in living rooms, on porches, in vestibules of office parks. I think this was maybe the 7th time that I've heard this in the last maybe 15 years. I was kind of eager to meet this lizard. So Laura, to come down here to Good Natured World headquarters. Laura, what was the lizard doing, or what were you doing when you?
Well, I was having another cup of coffee, and I went into my living room, and I saw something move really quickly under my couch, and I thought it might be an insect, and so I looked under there, and it was a lizard, and it was very, very small. But I'm like, what the heck, you know? And so then I started to try and catch it, which is not easy. And I started moving my furniture, trying to get it without killing it. And then my cat discovered what I was doing. So it was a crazy morning, but you know, I finally managed to trap the little guy. I was excited, but I was blown away. I was like, what is this doing here? You know?
Where did it come from? And let's go to this slide. Here we go. This is the detainee, I guess we should call him. That green arrow there, that body size, that was, I would say, 1 inch or less. The tail was almost twice as long as the body. Laura, I don't know how you caught it.
I did the old
Tupperware. You did the cup with a card?
Yeah, I had Tupperware, and then I had, you know, kind of if you're trying to trap a spider or something and let it out, put the Tupperware on top of it. It took 3 times, and then slid the paper underneath, and then flipped it over. Yeah, it was quite a process. And my cat was disappointed, so.
Well, my cat was very excited. Have any of you ever heard of this happening? You can pipe in, or you can make a comment in the chat box. But the experiences I've had, they've all come in as phone calls, somewhat frantic phone calls, I should add, because none of the people who discovered lizards in this area really had intended to have lizards. And Laura, did you say it was your daughter that had bought some plants?
Yeah, she had gone to a plant store in Geneva, and it was about 5 or 6 days earlier, and she'd gotten 2 new plants. Actually, yeah.
Well, and so a lot of plants, we'll go to this one next. A lot of plants that are sold in this area, tropical plants, are grown in large outdoor areas in the South. Florida is a huge producer of these tropical plants, and they're grown out in the open. So critters have access to these areas. And one of the most common creatures that visits these open growing yards, these nurseries, are these little brown anoles. Now, there are native United States anoles. The green anole is a native creature, but the brown anole was introduced from Cuba into Florida many years ago, and it's sort of becoming the dominant species down there. When we're talking about anoles, you might be able to picture this, those little green lizards that are sold in pet stores. They now do call them anoles, but back in the day, they used to call them chameleons. Now, they're not the old world chameleons that have the super long sticky tongue and the eyes that move independently, but they do have the ability to change color from green to brown and back again. The brown anole, it might get a little bit darker or a little bit lighter, but it is going to stay predominantly brown. So the question is, now what do we do with this thing? Laura, you decided that the lizard life wasn't gonna be for you.
Well, I have 2 cats, a turtle and a frog already.
Yeah.
Kate, my daughter, was very upset, and because she wanted to raise it, and I said, I know who will end up raising it. So, and I don't know how to. So.
Well, we might be able to arrange a transfer back. I tell you, these are really hard to raise. Let's go back now to this. So here's little Mac, which I named after the family that found him. This is him living his life now in a little terrarium that I set up. Those are mulberry leaves, which actually had a fair amount of little insects on them themselves. And I actually had to go to 2 different pet stores. The first store I went to, they sold these little tubes of these flightless fruit flies. And flightless is a sort of a relative term. They're supposed to be bred so that their wings don't, the wings are kind of curled and they don't really fly all that strongly. But I opened the tube and most of them flew away. So I tried again. I went to a different pet store. I got some that I could clearly see were not flying in their little container. They were just hopping around. A fruit fly, you know what they look like. They're what appears when your bananas get a little too ripe. This is the perfect size. That's how tiny this little guy is. Whoops, let's go back. So it's, I wasn't sure at first. This is my third attempt, my personal third attempt at doing this. The first time that somebody brought in a lizard, I was still working at Red Oak Nature Center down in North Aurora. So that goes back probably 15 or more years. And we didn't even have internet connection at Red Oak at the time. And so I was just kind of, doing the best I could, put it in a container. And I don't remember, I know the lizard did not survive. I don't remember if it escaped or it dried out but we weren't successful. So the second time was a lizard that was brought into Hickory Knolls. And this goes back probably 8 years or so. Same kind of thing. People had recently acquired some new plants in their house, and they watered the plants and they saw this little thing pop its head up out of the soil and bounded away. And just like you, Laura, they chased it around, caught it, brought it in. We actually kept that one for about 2 weeks before it ended up escaping. And we did manage to find it on a wall at Hickory Knolls, but it was very dehydrated and it too did not survive. So this little guy now, I've set him up. He started off in a little plastic container, kind of, actually, I think it had chocolate covered almonds from Trader Joe's in it. It's just a tiny, you can see the corner of it there. I think it held like a 8-ounce container of chocolate almonds. And once I saw that he was able to feed in there, then I moved him into this larger critter keeper type thing. And I put paper across the top of it because those tiny little slits of these plastic containers, they look like an aquarium, but they're made out of plastic and they have a lid with slots in it. Even those are, the slots are too big and the fruit flies would escape. So he's able to breathe, he's staying warm, he's staying humid, he's feeding. And I keep saying I have no idea of if it's a boy or a girl, but I will continue to keep you guys posted. kind of a fun, nerdy thing to do is to visit shops that sell these sorts of plants. And in fact, even the big box stores, they'll have tropical plant sections. And you can walk around. I actually talked to the staff at one time and said, hey, do you ever see lizards? And the woman said, oh, we do, but we can never catch them. They're too fast. So they're definitely around here. And these are not to be confused with the geckos that we talked about last year that are living next to a restaurant in downtown Geneva. I'll probably be going on another lizard hunt this summer. I'll keep you guys posted on that. But these are not geckos. These are anoles, accidental introductions appearing in living rooms around the area. So something just to keep in mind if you're adding plants to your house. You might be adding lizards as well. So Laura, this kind of involves you again. This was a photo from last year from your other daughter's house when the Imperial moths paid a visit. We've got mom and dad Imperial moth. Mom's on the top and dad is below. You can tell them apart by the amount of coloring, the dark coloration. The males have more dark and females have less dark on their wings. Males also have a larger feathery antennae, but these individuals both had their antennae tucked in. Well, I got an email from a woman up in Kenosha, and she actually had an Imperial moth on her garage that laid eggs. And these little Imperial moths are now hatching into these little caterpillars that I have to say, as beautiful as the moth is, the caterpillars are really kind of the opposite. They're quite stunning in their awkwardness, maybe. They're huge, bigger than your finger, and they can be anywhere from a deep green to a light green to a kind of a greenish brown to a dark brown color. Look at the choppers on these guys too. These guys are built to feed, just as all of the larvae of our giant silk moths. They do all their feeding at this life stage. They do not feed as adults. So it's really up to them and their ability to consume as much as possible before it gets cold out and they go into pupation at that point. But so they eat and eat and they grow and they grow. And then as we get into September, they've reached their maximum size in our area, which would be kind of like the one here on the left or the one down at the bottom. When they're as big around as your thumb and they're longer than your finger, then it's time for this stage. So upper left here is the pupa of an Imperial moth. And it looks quite a bit like the pupa of the Sphinx moth, which is down here in the lower right. The lower right image was a Sphinx moth pupa that was found in the garden plots next to hickory knolls. These things are kind of wild. I don't know if you've ever found one in your own gardens, but this is what we would see if we opened up a cocoon. This is what would be inside. It's the pupal stage, the pupation life stage, the where they're going to transform. They're going to do their metamorphosis inside this case, which is actually their last time they molt. The last stage of the caterpillar molts into this stage, which is the pupa. But a lot of times this occurs where we can't see it because it's inside a cocoon. But Imperial moths don't make cocoons. A lot of our Sphinx moths don't make cocoons. And I got to wondering, how do you tell the difference between the two? Well, first of all, you saw what the Imperial moth looks like. This is what the Sphinx moth caterpillars look like. This is a tobacco hornworm, which in our area, even though we don't grow tobacco, it is sort of the dominant tomato eater. There's also a tomato hornworm in our area, but the tobacco hornworm, for whatever reason, seems to be the more common species, at least here in St. Charles. And they will grow up and turn into this Sphinx moth here. This is the side of hickory knolls. We see quite a few of these as we get into late summer and fall. It's a pretty moth. It's got that orange coloration there. But there's a couple things to look for. over here on the left, this image popped up here. This is the tail end of an Imperial moth pupa. And see how it's got this little thing sticking out here like a little fish tail? The Sphinx moths don't have that. There's also where the proboscis comes out of the, over here on the lower right, the proboscis is seen on the pupa of the Sphinx moth. And you don't see that on the Imperial moth because, of course, they don't feed as adults, and the Sphinx moths do. Sphinx moths are actually really important pollinators. I was just making a case for them recently with a garden club group. I didn't get a lot of buy-in from what I was saying, but if you can just get past the way they eat our tomatoes, and you know, I've had them on my tomatoes. I tend to let them go because if you let the worms, the caterpillars feed on your tomatoes, chances are a lot of them are going to be parasitized by a Recluses wasp that will come and lay their eggs on those caterpillars. And you kind of garner your own biological control mechanisms for the caterpillars in your gardens. But anyway, I'm getting off track. If you want to keep your eyes open for these, first of all, for the large Imperial moth caterpillars as we get into August and September, and then look for these pupa. Be careful if you're doing some end of season gardening. If you're pulling things up by the roots, you don't want to uproot by accident one of these pupae because survive. So keep your eyes open and look at the tail end. See if you see those fishtail projections coming out of the bottom. If so, you know you found yourself an Imperial moth pupa. Pretty cool, huh? So remember last week we had the mystery call from Park Safety Officer Tim that he heard over here at Riverview Mini Golf at Potawatomi Park. I'm going to play it for you again. I told him that it was a Cope's gray tree frog, but then as I listened to it again, I wasn't so sure. So let's listen to what Tim recorded. Okay. So now in this area, in Kane County, the only tree frog species that we're aware of having is the Cope's gray tree frog. And it sounds like this. Let's try that again. And it sounds like this. So the literature describes the Cope's call as being harsh. Let's compare that to the eastern gray tree frog, which we do not have record of in Kane County. And that almost sounds like a red-bellied woodpecker. Almost, not quite. Because it's highly repetitive and it usually happens at night. All right, that's enough of that. So let's listen to Tim's again. And I thought tone-wise, it was actually more similar to the Eastern. In fact, I felt so strongly about it that I emailed Allison, who is the coordinator. She's the herpetile curator at the Peggy Notebart Museum in Chicago. I emailed her, and this was, we went through this last week too. The important part of her response is that she wasn't sure either. And so she was going to run the recording that Tim made at the mini golf course. And she was going to run through a spectrogram because our human ears sometimes can't distinguish the tones. So, you know, Allison is so busy. She's trying to reintroduce smooth green snakes and wood frogs. This is the height of her field season. I thought, boy, if I could make her life a little bit easier, I'm going to try. So I went online. Lo and behold, there are online spectrograph web pages where you can upload your own files and get your own prints. And this is what I got. So again, she says, Cope's calls go up to 15,000 hertz, while the Eastern only reaches 7,000 hertz. Here's the spectrogram of that recording. And here's 15,000 hertz or 1.5 kilohertz. And look, that's where the call peaks at. So it was, after all, a Cope's gray tree frog. It was just calling to our human ears. It sounded very Eastern tree frog-like, but it was indeed a Cope's. I got to tell you, Tim was kind of crushed. He was really hoping to be the one to find an Eastern gray tree frog here in King County. So told him to get back at it. There's got to be, his shifts go till midnight. So if there's going to be anybody in the park district that's going to find something weird, it's going to be Tim. So he's still working on it. I'll let you know when he does find something that's maybe the first ever here in King County. I'll keep you posted. So this has been occupying my time the last week or so. Mrs. Trish, I have to thank you for your contributions to this segment. Brown recluses. Now, I have to say I'm a little biased and have been kind of conditioned maybe over the years to responding no. Anytime somebody says, I found a brown recluse. Miss Bonnie, you know what I'm talking about. We talked about this earlier in the year too. Anytime somebody finds a spider people who don't know spiders, they want to know, you know, is it poisonous? Which actually spiders are venomous because they inject venom, not poison. Poison is something you ingest or rub up against, but that's a whole other topic. Around here, brown recluses, it's not impossible, but it is very, very unusual. What we do have, though, quite a few of, this is a picture of a running crab spider. We do have these, and they do kind of have this sort of sit up and take notice shape to their bodies. They've got this broad cephalothorax here. They've got this narrow abdomen. They've got these crazy long legs. Running crabs, though, the second pair of legs is longer than the first pair of legs. You know, there's also some markings that we look at with spiders, but gosh, spider markings are so variable. Even within species, it's one can look very dissimilar from another. And they're the same. They're the same species. So markings aren't always the thing we go for. There's other things. One is the legs and their position, not their position, their size relative to each other. But we do see these from time to time, and they do run. They are fast little things. See them sometimes when they come inside, we'll see them spread out on a wall, and they do look a little reclusive. However, there's some other things we look at. So this is the first image that Mrs. Tricia had sent over here to Good Natured World Headquarters. And it's kind of this sort of shape that makes you want to take a second look. As you're looking at this, you're probably thinking, wow, I see a violin-like marking, which is something you look for with brown recluse spiders, but not all brown recluse spiders have a violin-shaped marking. So there's other things you need to consider. So you want to think, first of all, where are you? And when we look at the range of the brown recluse, anywhere in this dark gray area, and this, by the way, is from Bug Guide, this is the known range of the spider, and it has shifted northward a little bit, but this is where if you see a spider in question, there's a chance it could be a brown recluse. The rest of the country, they're accidental introductions that could occur, but it's just not that likely. Their name is very apt, by the way. They are highly reclusive. When they do show up in other places, it's usually when materials have been moved. Somebody has packed up, maybe they were living down here in Arkansas and they decided they were going to move. Let's say they were going to go up here to Idaho, and they pack up boxes. They bring boxes with them that they maybe never opened the whole time they were living in Arkansas, and they get here, well, they may have accidentally brought along an egg case that opens up, and you might find that you all of a sudden have brown recluse spiders. But again, it's much more likely to find them in this range here in the dark gray area. that tendency of them to be reclusive and to stay within a small defined area, like inside of a moving box, in a wood pile, I always think of them as being like in the springs of the ottoman, you know, that you never tip over to look underneath. And if an egg case pops open, these spiders are, they don't disperse widely on their own. They tend to stick in an area. So if you are seeing more than one, that can increase the chance that you are indeed seeing a brown recluse, brown recluses, plural. And so Mrs. Tricia sent this photo. And these are all, you know, pretty much the same kind of spider, just different sizes. Some might be exoskeletons, which would indicate that there is reproduction going on and these things are getting bigger. I should mention that Mrs. Tricia lives in Kansas City, which is well within those boundaries of the brown recluse range. So another thing you want to look at is the eye arrangement. Now, we've talked about this before. Different types of spiders will have, different families have their eyes in different places. Here's those running crabs. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Most of our spider families, there's only a few exceptions. Most spider families have 8 eyes. My favorite spiders, the jumping spiders, they prey with these large eyes in the front. They're ambush predators, so their sight is actually really good. But they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big eyes, and then they've got 2 small eyes. So there are indeed 8 eyes on the jumpers as well. Some of my other favorite spiders, the wolfies, they too have 8 eyes, and it makes them look like they're sad. Look at the eye arrangement when you look at them head on. The eyes, the bottom 4 eyes, which are smaller, they're not as, they're important for sensing motion, but it's those 2 large eyes in the front that really help the spider see its prey. But the eye arrangement is really important. And the number of eyes is really important. You'll notice the brown recluse isn't on this page. It gets its own page. Brown recluse spiders only have 6 eyes. And the way they're grouped together, there's 2 in the front and there's 2 on either sides. And it kind of looks like a face. The 2 pairs of eyes, one on either side of the, I guess we call it the face, and then the 2 in the middle kind of makes it look like a little face of its own. That was what I was hoping we'd get to see. And so Mrs. Tricia, God bless you. You went after it and you did it. These are 2 more. So we are way over, you know, I've lost count of how many brown recluse spiders were showing up at the school where Tricia works. But here we can see clearly. Now this on the left here, this is the clearer photo, but it's, you can see 1 pair of eyes on either side of the head and 1 pair in the middle. And then you can really see it here, even though this photo on the left is, or on the right is a little bit blurrier, you can clearly see the groupings. 2 here, 2 here, and 2 in front. So yeah, Tricia, did you tune in tonight? Are you here? Maybe she's not tuned in tonight. Anyway, the upshot is that yes, there is a brown recluse. I don't know if we want to call it an outbreak or an incident, but the school is taking steps to contain these spiders. So that's just a little background, something to keep in mind. There's many different types of spiders, over 100 different species just in Illinois. And there's only 1 species called the brown recluse. And hopefully this will prepare you a little bit more knowing of what to look for. And if you're not around anyone or any boxes that have come from that defined brown recluse area, chances are you're probably seeing something other than this legendary and infamous species. So anyway, let's move along and let's do a little cheerleading for an insect that is probably almost as maligned as the brown recluse. It's wasps. You know, there's they get a lot of bad press, primarily because of those yellow jackets that live in the ground. You step on a yellow jacket nest and you pay for it for weeks and weeks because they come out, the guard wasps and then all the other workers that are in the area, they just, they come out as a eusocial group. They work together to defend their colony and their queen. But we have so many other wasps that don't do that, that are solitary species. In fact, here, this is a little clip from Bug Guide. The Sphexidae wasps are all solitary species, and they can look fairly similar. In fact, sometimes you actually have to look at what they're preying upon to make your diagnosis of species. But these are the wasps that sting usually a certain type of prey, and they drag it back to a nest, which is usually some sort of burrow in the ground. And they live a solitary life. They're not part of a big colony. They're not working in conjunction with other wasps. They're just on their own. The males kind of guard the area around the burrows, and the females provision the burrows with whatever their species prey item is. There are spider wasps. There are wasps that specialize in grasshoppers or crickets. There's the famous, the cicada killer wasp that will sting cicadas, and they're good sized wasps because they are able to fly the paralyzed wasp back to the burrow. These stings do not kill the prey. They just make it immobile so that then the female can lay her eggs on the prey, and then the larvae consume that prey. They don't have refrigerators, and they need to be able to keep the prey fresh. Paralyzing it, it's a horrible way to go for the insect that's been stung, but for the little wasp larvae, because that food is still alive, it's not going to spoil, and they're going to be able to feed on it until it's time for them to pupate. So anyway, well over 1,000, over 1,300 different species in North America. And this is their peak season now. We're starting to see the mature wasps, the males and the females. The males are guarding, the females are visiting our plants. They're actually good pollinators. Again, wasps don't get credit for a lot of the good deeds that they do, but many of these solitary wasps, they're out there visiting plants. They're getting nectar to fuel their own activities, but then they're also stinging the prey that they will take back to their burrows. So a couple of weeks ago, I got this text from Miss Laura. She's our program supervisor, and she runs our summer nature camps. And she noticed all of these fresh burrows on one of our paths out at the Hickory Knolls Natural Area. And when I first saw this picture, I didn't have my reading glasses, and I thought, well, Miss Laura's got a nice manicure there. And then I looked again, I realized, well, she's actually using her hand as a scale to show how large the hole is. That is it's a hole that was a little bit bigger around than a pencil. So it wasn't big enough to be a cicada emergence burrow, and it also wasn't big enough to be a cicada killer entrance. So she was wondering what it was, and good naturalist that she is, she hung around until she got a picture of the wasp who created the hole. It's the wasp there on the left. I have to say, I don't know exactly what species this is. I'm still trying to work it out. Actually, I want to get over there and see if I can observe these wasps myself. I don't know them well enough to be able to tell. The males and the females have some slightly different markings, but it is the Cercis species. And I know this because, see, if we look at the abdomen, there's each segment there's a little stricture. each segment goes in just a little bit in between the margins of each. Excuse me. So I'm not able to see the face of this female to see if there's unusual projections just above her mouth, but that's another identifying trait. Most of the Circe species prey on beetles, some on beetles and other wasps. Now, when she first sent me this photo, I was thinking that it might be a bee wolf, which is another solitary wasp species. That's BEE, and then wolf, WOLF. Bee wolves prey on bees. And we have a whole lot of sweat bees that are also in the ground in that area. So at first I thought that's what it was. I was wrong. It's some sort of a Circe, and they specialize a lot of times in beetles. So I want to get out there and see just exactly what type this is. But I wanted to make sure of all the good things that these wasps do. And they are out there right now helping control these other insect species like grasshoppers and crickets and beetles and even other things that are predators like spiders. Really cool things to be aware of as we get into the height of our summer. So you might have thought that those brown recluse spiders were creepy. Check this video out. Now that we've had some rain, we've gotten a couple of reports of these guys here. Can you see this thing whipping around on this plant as the wren sings in the background? Isn't that wild? Let's watch it again. So this is, it's funny, this little creature, you know that Excelsior that is sometimes used as a packing material? It's a shredded plant fiber, I think. That's what those fruit flies that I'm feeding to the little lizard are packed in this Excelsior material. I must have dropped some in with the lizard this afternoon when I gave him some more fruit flies. I thought, oh my gosh, do I have a horsehair worm in my lizard enclosure? That's what we're looking at. This little creature here is a looks like a thread, but it moves on its own. This is the end result of a really bizarre and not well understood life cycle that it goes between aquatic and terrestrial areas. The eggs are laid and the larvae come out, and they live in an aquatic insect. That aquatic insect transports this encysted larva, and it gets consumed by another insect. These horsehair worms actually finish their life cycle inside the gut of crickets. Then through a process that also is not well understood, the horsehair worm kind of explodes out of the body of the cricket and starts the life cycle over again by laying more eggs, and around it goes. These are just the creepiest, weirdest looking things. And if you happen to find yourself near plants, let's go back to this. If you're near water and you're looking at plants and you see something that air or a thread blowing in the wind, give it another look, because it could very well be that you are looking at a horsehair worm creeping its way along. Pretty wild stuff, huh? I wish I knew more about them, but everything I read was a lot of gaps in the knowledge that we have about these creatures. And if you're looking for something to study, this might be the thing for you. Who knows? They're also called Gordian worms because, like the Gordian knot, they kind of are apt to twist themselves up and almost, form their own knots. But if you see reference to Gordian worm, that's another name for these bizarre creatures that we call the horsehair worm. So something to keep an eye out for. Now, we've got one reader email that I wanted to share with you, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. This is from a retired professor at Northeastern University. His name's Bill, and he said that when he was teaching environmental studies in the 70s and 80s, there was a book called Living in the Environment by G. Tyler Miller Jr. And I love the citations that this gentleman used. On page E93, there was a table that really caught my eye. Among the characteristics was behavioral adaptability to different environmental conditions, with the red-headed woodpecker given as an example of an endangered species with low adaptability because it flies in front of cars. There wasn't any source given for the statement. But the reason that Bill paid attention to it was because they had moved out to a farm north of McHenry, and it had trees on each side of the road. There was a small population of red-headed woodpeckers that would commonly fly from tree to tree with a low undulating flight. I worried about hitting one when they sometimes flew across the road in front of my car. And the last one I saw by our farm was lying dead in the road. Then he adds that later editions of Miller's text did not have that table, but his little reference to red-headed woodpeckers has stuck with me ever since, and I have looked in vain for a red-headed to return. So I don't know if what your experiences are with red-headed woodpeckers being hit by cars. I know around here we don't seem to have enough of them around anymore to get hit by cars. But I did get curious, and I spent an afternoon this past weekend kind of looking to see what I could find. And I didn't find any sources either. I didn't see citations for these statements, but I did find several web pages that state, as Professor Bill said, that the birds have a low undulating flight and that they fly at windshield level in pursuit of insects. So that could result in their demise. One page said that they forage for worms and caterpillars on roads and are therefore more prone to getting hit by cars. There was a few pages that mentioned that because they're suitable habitat, which is sort of open canopy woodland with lots of dead snags, that sort of habitat is somewhat rare. So the birds are nesting in wooden utility poles, which are next to roads, which puts them in harm's way. But again, I didn't see any sources for the statements. I did, though, on Cornell's wonderful All About Birds webpage. They had this statement. In the middle 20th century, red-headed woodpeckers were quite commonly hit by cars as the birds foraged for aerial insects along roadsides. Now, when we talked about redheads several weeks ago, we talked about how the use of pesticides had affected their numbers, how the loss of habitat had affected their numbers. But at that time, this getting hit by cars wasn't named as one of the reasons why these red-headed woodpeckers are rare. And it also kind of begs the question, well, why just redheads? I actually found a dead downy woodpecker in the road a couple of weeks ago. I plucked some of its tail feathers because I think the downy woodpecker tail feathers are really interesting in and of themselves. They're very stiff, and the birds use them to kind of brace themselves as they're doing their pecking against wood on a tree or a house. But again, it was a downy, it wasn't a redhead. If redhead woodpeckers are prone to getting hit by cars, why are other woodpeckers not? Are they flying at higher, are they just higher up in the air? They're not flying low? I don't know. So if you've got thoughts on that, I would love to hear that in the chats as well. So with that, let's move along to next week. We're going to take a look at 13-line ground squirrels and their place in our local ecology. I'd love to say it was a heartwarming tale, but we'll just call it a tale of some local baby bats, and maybe a cautionary tale about baby bats. We're going to take a look at a moth at a sphinx, when a sphinx moth is not a sphinx moth. We're going to take a look at what our local geese are up to, trash line orb weavers have made their appearance here in the area. I wanted to do a little spotlight on them. Who knows what else is going to happen over the coming days. Lots of things are happening out in our great, wonderful world. I'm going to end our share and I will turn it over to you. Does anybody have any stories, questions, comments, anything that you'd like to share with us this evening? If not, okay. Hey, Kay.
Hi. Since, let's say, the American toads tended to have 2 rounds of mating season per se this year, is there any chance like the great blue heron did? Because all of a sudden I'm seeing 2 and you never see 2 herons together, very rarely.
Oh, doing a second round of like maybe a court. Yep.
Yeah, they're
Like
courting
they're-
again or something.
You know, I thought they only raised one, but if they had a failure, they might
Okay.
be giving it another go. I know there was a lot of concern about the rookery that was down in near. Well, the people who are complaining about it kind of mismanaged or mismeasured how close the rookery in North Aurora was to where the North Aurora village was setting off their fireworks on the 4th of July.
Oh, no.
Everything I've heard is that those guys, the birds survived just fine. But storms, sometimes, a lot of times herons will nest in dead trees. And if the tree isn't solid or stable, it could fall down in a storm. So they might be trying it for that reason.
Okay,
So that kind of
makes sense.
related, but not for the same reason that the toads are, but I could see them maybe wanting to give it another shot. They've still got some time before they'll have to hurry. They can't be messing around too much because time will be short to get those young raised up, but it could happen. It could.
Yeah, somebody else mentioned they saw a number. Let's see. Is that true? You tend to only see 1 heron as a general rule?
They do tend to, yeah, if you see a lot together, that it does make you wonder what happened. Or if you see 2 together, it's usually like a courtship thing. They're not like cranes where the crane parents are together all the time and they raise their young together, but
Right.
the herons, it's a little bit more unusual.
Okay, great, thanks.
Cool. Keep us posted. And it looks like Greg and Kelly, you had a, not sure if we're being overly aware or sensitive. Oh, but you have been noticing a lot of dead birds lately. Different species, same species. I looked, I didn't see any farther updates. The Cook County Health Department had issued an advisory, which was kind of interesting, different types of birds. Okay. You know, I did find, in fact, I was gonna, I took a picture of it. I haven't figured out how to present it yet. I found a baby cardinal that was dead, but pretty sure it was a window kill. This was when I was attending a meeting last week and it was laying on a bench, but the bench was maybe 3 feet or so out in front of a big glass window. Yeah, it's to my knowledge, and please, if you've heard different, feel free to say something. I have not seen any different advisory from the Illinois DNR or any of the state wildlife biologists telling us to, they were saying to, you know, clean your feeders regularly, which is good advice no matter what. But I haven't had any, seen any updates about the illness that was killing birds in the East coming into our great state of Illinois. But yeah, gonna keep our eyes open, and I'd appreciate hearing from you guys too of what you're seeing. Greg, were you gonna say something, or Kelly?
Yeah, just we haven't seen anything either. Just, and I feel like all of them could be chalked up to like window kills or hit by a car or something like that. But it just seems like we've seen more lately than normal. But again, it could just be we're being overly sensitive.
Awareness, yeah. Well, and I kind of wondered if there was an element of that too. We have seen, in fact, one birding forum, they said, well, maybe there's because of, everybody, well, it's an exaggeration. A lot of people last year, because they were stuck at home, decided to start feeding birds. And so it could be if there was something in the wild populations that hadn't been identified. And yet, and then there's all these new feeders going up, and maybe people aren't keeping them clean. Maybe there's tainted seed that's being distributed. But the gist of that forum was that there's more birds feeding at feeders than we've had in the past. And is that playing a role? Because when you create that gathering area, where it's a little bit unnatural, is that then causing a disease that might have been somewhat more contained if birds were at natural sources, are the feeders helping to spread it? That was the thoughts of those particular birders. But yeah, please, everybody, keep your eyes open. Maybe we can talk about this again next week. I haven't seen a lot of dead birds, but again, when I'm out, it's usually nighttime. And my dog's tech support puppy was rolling on a dead shrew the other day, but I'm pretty sure it was dead because he'd found it earlier. I saw him shaking his head in the backyard, and then I saw him rolling, and I think it was he's a killer sometimes. And I think I have one less shrew in my yard because of that. But I haven't seen any in my yard. I did scrub my bird bath, but I have not brought it in yet. I clean it every day with a brush, and then I sanitize it about every, I don't know, 5 days or so. I bring it in and I put bleach in it. But yeah, I don't know. I hate to think I'd be part of the problem, but I think we should all be a little bit more vigilant. And like you said, Kelly, maybe we're being overly sensitive to it, but boy, if there is something going on, we certainly want to help, be able to identify it. No. Anybody else? If not, have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will look forward to seeing you all back next Tuesday night.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.
Good night.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.